Awesome. Thanks for coming, everyone. This is Security and Compliance Session 314. Today we're going to be talking about GxP compliance on the AWS cloud. This is a session for me that's been a long time in coming for those of us who have been in pharma or medical devices for a number of years. You probably know kind of how fast the industry is adopting the cloud for regulated workloads. And so today I'm proud to be able to present with my co-presenters, Dan and Sujatha from Merck, about their experience running regulated workloads on AWS and kind of how they got there. We're hoping that out of this session, we'll talk a little bit, I'll talk briefly about some of the experience we've had this year in the healthcare compliance team in AWS security as a whole. And then I'll turn it over to Dan and Sujatha, who will really talk how Merck did it, what their approach is to supplier approval, assessment, the different controls at the different layers that they see in their technology stack. So you know that we have a lot of security and compliance certifications. GxP, unlike ISO or SOC, isn't a certification, it's a regulation. And so a lot of the work that companies have had to do is translating these IT industry controls into their pharma and industry-specific compliance controls. So a lot of these certifications, there are some companies using ISO as the basis for their supplier approval. Some are using SOC and PCI. And others have their own way of doing it. There really isn't one unified way yet that people are doing it, but these certifications tend to be the basis that they do their assessments on. And then along with the certifications themselves, we provide a number of different materials to enable both the supplier assessment phase, the agreement phase, and then the monitoring and operations phase of running any workload in the cloud. This year, we actually announced a new tool. For those of you who have requested compliance reports in the past, you may know it requires an NDA. You probably had to talk to your AWS account rep. And this year, we launched a new tool called the AWS Artifact. And it's a self-service portal inside the management console where you can log in and request the confidential compliance reports that we offer, like the SOC report and the PCI report. So that's something that we announced at the Security State of the Union. It's something you can sign up for. It's invite only right now, but you can request preview access. We're really excited about it. We think it's going to reduce a lot of the friction to give you the information you need and do these assessments more quickly and in a more self-service type manner. So my team, the medical security team at AWS, we've been growing and we've also been taking on more outreach activities. One thing a lot of our pharma and medical device customers ask from us is to participate in the industry associations, be engaged. Don't just sit back and wait for the customers to come to us. Get out there and educate. And so we've taken that message to heart, and my team has kind of led the charge in getting out there. One of the things we did early in the year was we participated in a medical device cybersecurity conference hosted by the FDA themselves. So we actually traveled to White Oaks with a number of other companies there, many of them medical device companies, as well as the National Health Information group called the NHISAC. And really, the discussion was around not the cloud, but more cybersecurity in general of medical devices. There's a huge problem I think we've all seen with data breaches. You've seen a number of different medical devices withdrawn from the market because of cybersecurity issues. And so the industry is really trying to work together with the agency to figure out, how can we solve this problem together, and at the same time, work with the technology providers to bring in whatever solutions they have. We were really excited to be part of that. I think we have a lot of security knowledge that we have to offer, and I think as time goes on, you'll start to see more and more medical devices using services like IoT, Kinesis streams, and so forth, as well as the best-in-class security products and security by design frameworks that we offer as well. We also participated with some of our industry peers, our technology industry peers, and we provided feedback on a data integrity guidance draft that FDA published. So that was something where it was actually the first document that FDA has published publicly that uses the word cloud. So I think until that document came out, there wasn't any mention about cloud, and so a lot of folks were wondering what their stance is, and in that document we saw the very first mention of the word cloud, and so we took that as an opportunity to partner with our cloud our cloud industry peers and provide feedback. It was a very small amount of feedback on a term, the word cloud, the way it was used. But again, it's just a small example of how we're trying to participate and really encourage and accelerate the use of best-in-class technology for the life sciences industry. And then lastly, we participate in a group called FUSE, the Pharmaceutical User Software Exchange. It's a nonprofit group primarily focused on clinical data standards, but there is a small working group talking about regulated workloads for cloud. And we've published, actually we just published a week ago, our third version of the framework document through FUSE, and that was a collaborative effort with a number of companies. And through developing that framework, we've actually been approached by a number of other industry associations like Bioforum, Pistoia Alliance, and others that we have engaged, and really there's just a lot of interest about how to do it. I think we're coming to the point now where it's not if, it's how. And so I think in the rest of the presentation with Dan and Sujatha, hopefully they're going to give you some of the how that they used. One of the patterns we've seen for companies that adopt the cloud for regulated workloads, and this is true in life sciences, but also in industries like the financial services industry and in the federal government, is there's a maturity model of the compliance team themselves. If you're in a pharma compliance team or a medical device compliance team, your ability for your company to adopt the cloud is gated on the maturity of everybody who's participating. So what I tend to see is IT and security are first. They're the ones who talk about the cloud and want to use it. And maybe they do a proof of concept and they're doing a vendor risk assessment based on security principles. And then they think they're ready to press the button to launch. And somebody says, hey, we better talk to those compliance guys or those supplier management guys. And then they're really starting at ground zero when the other teams are already at stage 3 and 4 in their understanding of the cloud. So I think this really represents the kind of progression of understanding that all the stakeholders in your organization are going to go through. There's usually some kind of training about what is the cloud. I think one of the things I consistently hear is the word cloud used in a way where they think it's the same across all vendors. And I think one of the key principles to really educate your team about is that cloud models are very different depending on the cloud provider. And so having that understanding up front really enables things like assessments and agreements to go much faster. Once you get past this kind of training and awareness and proof of concept stage, it goes more into approval or a first assessment and then approval of the cloud for a regulated workload. And once that stage passes, now you can really start launching your first, second, and third workloads. And typically we see customers starting with smaller, simpler workloads, maybe they're lower risk systems. And then as they get practice and experience, they move up the stack in terms of their risk. The other common pattern I've been seeing is kind of the deployment scenarios of these workloads. And COTS, for those who don't know, is commercial off the shelf. It's basically the software you buy. We offer some of those packages in our marketplace. And so you can see scenario 4 really kind of represents the marketplace model where you're selecting the application that you want. You may have configuration control over the app, but through the marketplace offering, the underlying infrastructure may be provided as a template by the vendor, and so that, or by the partner, and so that's why you see that green responsibility there. On the scenario 1 and 2, that's really for the pharma and medical device companies that are using and managing the cloud all on their own without that partner there. And then on the far right would be the software as a service providers, your TraceLinks, Medidata, Sparta Systems, and a number of other companies that are building software solutions for your industry on the platform. The other trend, again, I think we mentioned this last year at our compliance summit, but it still holds true. The real fundamental shift in thinking for compliance people in the GxP space is around this software-defined infrastructure concept. Virtually all of the practices in GxP are built around physical boxes. This idea that I'm going to unpack something that comes in my receiving dock, I'm going to physically move it to my data center, and all of the installation protocols around that are physical. And now without that, really we're moving more into this virtual software-defined world. So instead of the IQ standing for installation, it's almost more of an instantiation qualification. So you can see on the right there, that's a CloudFormation template that really defines the protocol of installation or instantiation. And I think we're just now starting as an industry to have this conversation around what does automated qualification look like? I've seen a couple different patterns from different customers. Some of them still doing manual, taking screenshots of the management console. And then we've got others going down the road of approving their CloudFormation template as the protocol. And so again, there's not one model here, but I think we're getting to the point where we're having this conversation around what does validation look like and how can we make it continuous? It's not enough that it's validated once you install it, but it needs to be continuously compliant throughout its operations. And the automated checks that the cloud, in particular AWS, offers, I think are really gonna, it's not a matter of being equivalent to what we've done in the past, it's better. And so now it's figuring out how do we do that. So with that software-defined infrastructure, this is what better looks like. You're creating gold templates, not just of your servers, but of the infrastructure itself, the networks, the storage volumes, the databases. The entire thing can be version controlled. You really can't do that today in a physical world. You can't take a snapshot of 100 physical servers very easily anyway. You may spend significant resources to try and do that, but I would guess most of you are not. In this, it's very easy in this environment. The other thing is the automated deployment. So those who are familiar with continuous integration, continuous deployment in the DevOps world, that model works very well for the cloud. And now it's just a matter of figuring out what are the right controls and checkpoint in that DevOps pipeline that will enable continuous validation for every single change that you push to your production environment. Logging and reporting, every product we have has some level of logging, and we have that great CloudTrail tool that makes it easy to centralize. Glacier makes it easy to archive and retain those logs indefinitely for a very low cost. So the amount of data now is much, much more than you've had in the past. And really, it's cheap enough to store all of it if you want. But then the other part of that, too, is knowing what pieces of that data you want to pull out and show to your auditor or inspector in the event that you're asked questions about how you maintain control. Automatically verify conformance. So again, using the approved template model, it's very easy to check your production environment and make sure that it matches the last approved version of the infrastructure that your quality team approved or your infrastructure team approved. So it's getting, again, that automatic checks and then notifying you if there's an out-of-spec event. That using SNS topics or Lambda, we've seen a bunch of those. We also have third-party partners who provide tools that make that easy as well. So all these things that we're used to in the IT space and the security space, we're now translating those into the compliance space. And then lastly, the 100% inventory 100% of the time. Anybody who has an IS registry, who's tried to maintain a database of configuration management tools, knows it's very hard to get a 100% accurate list all the time. And in this environment, it's scripted. It's available to you whenever you want to push the button and say, give me the report. So that's something we just haven't seen before. So I think it'll take time for us to absorb what that means from a compliance perspective. But again, it's starting to happen now. And I look forward to this time next year when we can talk about the awesome solutions people have built around this. So this came from our DevOps article that just came out. But again, the DevOps pipeline and continuous deployment pipeline are the same thing. So it's just a matter of figuring out where along this pipeline are your checks and balances. Do you pre-approve some of your changes so that you don't have to ask quality for a signature? Or do you build a prompt in your workflow to go ask a quality person to approve that change before it goes to production? Again, we're seeing the technology model and the compliance model merge together. So in the spirit of providing one example of validation that I've seen, really again, that protocol model fitting a CloudFormation template on the left, and then your CloudTrail logs on the right, which show that that environment matched the protocol that you defined, is really the report. And so this is, again, is a lot different than many are used to, especially if you're used to having PDF documents or even paper documents that you print out and then you sign physically, and then you scan, and then you import into your document management system. That's a lot of overhead, especially when you're trying to accelerate the speed of change to adapt to your business and to adapt to the security environment. For medical devices in particular, but also for pharma systems, cybersecurity is going to keep getting mentioned over and over again until the breaches stop, until the vulnerabilities are fixed. And so it's actually a better compliance posture to be able to deploy faster than what we've seen in the past, where compliance was kind of measured in how slow you made changes in many ways. I don't think that was the explicit intent, but in practice, we've put so much process in the past around changes that it's slowed things down to the point where you can't even sometimes respond to a critical security event if you need to. We absolutely have to fix that problem, and I think everyone in this room is part of that solution. So, extending this further, right, it may be foreign to your auditors. Like, are you going to go train your auditors on how to read JSON script? I mean, some do. Some provide training. And we've seen in other industries, the willingness of auditors to learn new things like that is much higher. And so extending on this example now, we've had a number of customers say, you know what, I don't want to train my auditors on how to read JSON. I want to show them the data in a format they're already familiar with. And so they build these document pipelines that grab data out of the logs and publish it into a Word file or a PDF file that can get stored in S3 or Glacier or pumped back into their document management system on-prem. So I wish I had a reference architecture for this yet. I'm hopeful that by next time we will, possibly even some partners offering products around this. But this is the next frontier this year, I think. I'm really going to spend a lot of time figuring this out with folks so that if you're a company that's willing to train your auditors, you can do that. And if you're one who wants to give your auditor the same experience they have now, showing them PDF-type documents, that you can do that as well if that's how you want to do it. We don't want compliance and audit to be the blocker on any of this. And so we have to get creative about finding solutions. I think for now, I'm going to step down and invite my colleagues, Dan and Sujatha, up to present about Merck. And I hope you enjoy what they have to say.
Okay, hello everyone. So the remaining slides that we're going to go through is Merck's approach and approved strategy for implementing GxP workloads in our Amazon cloud. For those of you who don't know what GxP means, I'll just give you a quick review. It means good manufacturing practices or good clinical practices, good laboratory practices. They're basically regulations that the FDA and other agencies around the world have made in the manufacture of drug product to make sure it's safe and effective and so forth. And as part of that, we have to ensure computerized systems are also safe and effective and accurate. The data in them is accurate. They're operating when they're making our drugs in a repeatable fashion and so forth. So clearly very important that we get, when we implement these systems, that they're properly implemented and so forth. So this really, our journey with cloud computing at Merck started about 4 or 5 years ago. However, it took a lot longer to get the GxP strategy in place just because of the complexity with these types of systems in themselves. So again, for approximately the last year and a half, we've been working, and Amazon's been a great partner with us to come up with a strategy and supporting us, and we really appreciate it. Okay, just a little bit about Merck, our company. We're a very large pharmaceutical company that's really interested in the health and well-being of people around the world. We probably spend, if not the most, close to the most of our revenues on research and development, because we believe that's part of our success. And we're really, it's a very complex company. We do many different things: manufacturing, research and development, clinical trials. So we have a lot of different types of systems across our company. And we're in many different types of businesses. So our largest business is pharmaceuticals, small molecule, which is basically chemical-based drugs, and biologics. We're also in vaccines, very big in the vaccine business, and animal health as well. And with that, oh, you don't need it? Oh, thank you.
So I'm Sujatha Guruswamy, and I partnered with Dan and as well as Amazon over probably about 6 to 8 months, for the strategy to come together for us. So what I'm going to do is maybe take a couple of minutes and go over our environment at Merck. So From a cloud perspective, we not only use software as a service for functions like HR, we also use infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. And we also do hosting of applications. These are dedicated applications that go into some of our suppliers' data centers. Again, from this conversation that we're going to have today, or this session and this strategy, is really focused on the Merck Managed Cloud. And Merck Managed Cloud is a managed and secured environment for us to use public cloud. And for this discussion, we're going to focus just on the Amazon Web Services, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service product. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm actually not going to go through the values that we get out of Amazon Web Services. I think everybody knows by now. We've spent the last 3 days talking all about this, right? So I'm going to skip this. Oh, wait. What's going on? There we go. So what I wanted to do was kind of set the stage. It's not that we're dabbling in the cloud, right? So when we look at our storage platform, especially when you're looking at our file storage, and we compare it to the amount of storage that we use in Amazon, especially on the S3 platform, we see 10% of data that's being put in the S3 platform. So it's not a small implementation that we have. So just to kind of set the stage of where we are right now, we heavily use relational databases, especially the RDS databases, and we have about 10% of our database real estate in Amazon. And we use 6 different regions. 3 are primary, which is Virginia, Ireland, and Singapore. And we leverage Sao Paulo, Tokyo, and Beijing for business needs in those markets.
Okay.
Ian?
All right. All right, so I'm going to talk about the actual strategy development at Merck. And just started on this about a year and a half ago, although we started with our overall cloud implementation about 4 or 5 years ago. So some of the first things that we did 4 or 5 years ago for general purpose or non-regulated applications was to develop, number one, a security framework. So we had a very well-developed, well-designed security framework. That was the first thing that we did for obvious reasons. And then we also created a type of onboarding document for system development lifecycle to help teams that want to put applications into the cloud at Merck to kind of give them a playbook of how to do that. So that was kind of what we had. But when we kind of stepped back and looked at what do we need to do to make sure that if a regulator comes in here and inspects our system, are we fully covered? And we really had to do what I'll call a lot of reverse engineering based on that use case. We talked to a lot of different people in the company, people in quality, people in inspection readiness, and technical people, security people, to help formulate an overall strategy. And that's really what this first bullet is that what ended up being is what we're going to be covering now is talking about our systems assurance strategy, which is basically the umbrella that we have that describes our strategic approach to do this. And then underneath the next 2 bullets are security and our SDLC type of strategy. So these are what I call the 3 pillars that we needed to complete our overall GxP approach at Merck. So based on these 3 pillars, we actually created 3 white papers to describe each one of these. So the bottom 2 white papers are, they were written a few years ago, but what we really needed was the one on top, the systems assurance white paper that kind of ties it all together. And I've actually gotten public clearance to distribute that white paper. So if anybody wants to get that after this talk, please email myself and Sujatha, and we'll be happy to share that with you. The white paper gets into a lot more detail that I'm going to get into today because I'm trying to give you the high-level overview. But I'd be happy to share that with you and get into and show you more of the details underneath the hood. The next 2 documents, I can't share those because we still got some secrets in there that we have to remove before we share it. So, okay. So from this reverse engineering exercise, what we found and where the big idea came from was that we needed like a language that everybody understood what we were talking about. And what ended up being the thing that, the big idea was this diagram. We created this diagram, it's a 5-layer diagram to kind of show where everything fits into an overall cloud architecture, so everybody can talk from the same point of view. And once we created this diagram, everything else kind of fell into place. So what we do in a systems assurance strategy is that at each layer, we're going to talk about what controls we need at each layer in order to be GxP, we feel GxP ready or compliant. And that was the other big idea, is that once we created this diagram, we realized that we're better off talking about controls and control objectives as opposed to just, what do you need to do? Because the control objectives really made it a lot clearer and let us kind of pick apart the problem. And that's really the basis of our strategy that I'll be talking about next. So when you do look at the white paper, if you ever get a chance, like I said before, each layer, the control objective is defined. What are the controls we need at each layer? So we have some examples below. This is an example from the 0-1 layer, we call, where basically it's owned by Amazon. And like the first control objective is we want the IT third party, AWS, to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness of their environment. So the way we actually implement that is the process control, where we annually review various things that we'll be explaining a little bit later on to verify the control environment. All right, so this is the basic structure of the strategy. It's very control-based, and we'll list the controls for every single layer. Okay. All right. Sujatha now will kind of explain the diagram.
So we had a lot of fun designing this diagram. It's gone through a lot of iterations, but what I'll do is I'll kind of walk through the layers, right? So we'll start at layer 0. So layer 0 is basically the physical aspect of IT, right? So this is your physical building, your data center, your network devices, your storage devices, and your servers. So that's what layer 0 is, and Amazon calls it, or Amazon Web Services calls it, global infrastructure. And on top of that is layer 1. So layer 1 is AWS's proprietary software that enables, building of servers through EC2 or, all of those different services. I think, what would they say, 70 plus services that they offer. So that's part of layer 1. So what I want to make clear is that layer 1 is not where you build your servers. Layer 1 is still Amazon's software. That's their IP, and that's what layer 1 is. So we still are not at the server or database layer yet. And then moving up to layer 2, so this is a cloud management layer. So this is the first layer in which we at Merck have access to to Amazon Web Services. So from a cloud management layer, here's where you create your Amazon accounts, or you're creating VPCs, or you're creating access control to providing access to the underlying Amazon layer. So that's layer 2. So now on top of layer 2 is what we define as our layer 3. Again, we still don't have the server and database that you need for the application of this layer. What layer 3 consists of is standards. This is where you create your gold images, your configuration, your security standards. All of those things are defined in layer 3. You could have your scripts, your cloud formation scripts. All of those things are in layer 3. Now, after, at the layer 4 is where you're now starting to build your instance-specific servers and databases, or if you're building Redshift or EMR, that's what takes place at layer 4. So this is where you're actually building those servers and databases for the application. So that's layer 4. And layer 5 is where you have your business applications. So for each one of these, there's specific processes. For layer 0 and 1, from Merck's perspective, we have supplier agreements, and we do reviews on a periodic basis. It could be, a weekly review sessions from a technical side, or a quarterly review on all of the issues we've had, and then supplier agreements, standard supplier agreements. And layer 2 is something that's new for most companies. So this, we follow our infrastructure standard practices here. So, the change control process and incident management and doing IQOQs and all of those things is done at layer 2 as well. Having trouble with the clicker. So the next step we actually did was, as part of the strategy, is to make clear who is responsible for each one of those layers. So in our case, layer 2, the responsible party is actually my team, which is the Merck Cloud Service owner. And layer 3 and 4, the ownership belongs to the infrastructure team, and layer 5 is with the technical unit system owner.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about specific layers and some of the key controls and have some discussion about that. And this first topic is a very controversial topic, or has been, and we've talked a lot about this. And the question for a lot of GxP pharmaceutical companies, we're very used to doing on-site audits for GxP systems. However, based on cloud technology itself, you don't really have dedicated physical resources. At any one time, the services you get, you're not sure where you're getting that from. So there is no dedicated hardware and so forth, just by the nature of technology. So based on the rationale that the usefulness of a physical inspection loses its value based on the nature of cloud technology, we have decided that we're going to forego on-site audits when it comes to Amazon, the Amazon cloud and our Merck managed cloud. And in lieu, we're going to do other things in order to gain that assurance that their control environment and their overall environment is operating effectively. And we'll talk a little bit, get into a little more detail exactly how we do that. So not only do we verify their environment by doing certain reviews, but we also do typical things that we do for everybody else, including information risk assessments, supplier assessments, and so forth. In addition, we also are doing continuous control monitoring, or at this point it's really more like control monitoring of the overall environment to make sure that what we put out there is still in compliance and so forth. And actually, Jeff Feist, who's in our audience, he spoke about that on Monday, exactly how we're doing that. So I guess if you want, you could see his presentation when they post them later. Okay, so the process that we've implemented to cover our layer 0 and layer 1 controls, which is basically under the control of Amazon, is to do a assessment, a detailed assessment that really takes into account a lot of different things that are listed on the right-hand side. So what we're going to be doing is, on a yearly basis, we're going to do performance monitoring. We're going to see, have there been any trends in terms of the types of tickets we're getting or performance issues, things like that. Almost like a periodic review that we do on our computer systems in GxP. We're also going to be looking at independent third-party audits like the SOC reports. We're going to be looking at their industry certifications to see if they're up to date. And also what's very important is AWS has created a quality manual for GxP that we verify against to ensure that all the controls listed there are operating effectively as well. So Sujatha is actually the person that did this review this year. We approved this approach in July. And essentially, she maps all the controls from the quality manual to their different third-party certifications and third-party reports to see if they're operating effectively. If they're not, we have a process in place with AWS where we will mitigate those findings. But this is the overall process that we've put in place. And Sujatha is going to talk now more specifically as what she looked at in this first review and talk about some more details.
The first document that you see here is the quality manual. Again, I think it's like 50 or 60 odd pages. It's pretty big. And it just lists through all of the controls in place and what are the other certifications that actually satisfy those controls are present in the quality management system overview. That's, I think it's published on a yearly basis, right? And then in addition to that, we also review SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3 reports. When I say review, it's about not only looking at the controls. The one key thing that we want to take into account is that these SOC reports do not cover all of the services that AWS has. So we need to be very careful because if you are using this process to say this is the process we're using for our GxP systems, we want to make sure that the services that we're using are covered in these SOC reports. So that's one first set of verification we do. And the second is also the data centers, the regions that are involved in the SOC reports. Not all regions are covered in the SOC reports either. So again, those two things are really critical to check, and we maintain a separate documentation of what are those AWS services that are approved for GxP workload. That is really, it comes out from these reports. The other ones, the easy ones, actually are the ISO certifications. They're one page, you don't have to worry about it. And I want to go back to the SOC 1 report. Within the SOC 1 report, there is something called as the customer user entity, it's complementary user entity controls. And for many of these services within Amazon, AWS not only has a certain amount of responsibility, they actually tell us that we have a certain level of responsibility that we need to satisfy. So what we do is we go through each one of those requirements and document how we are mitigating that control. In the sense that, do we implement it, do we train, or if that's not valid for our environment, we state so. So that's part of our periodic review as well. And then you see this AWS PCI compliance package in here, and it's unfortunate we had to review this document because there was one specific control in the quality manual that was only satisfied by the PCI. So when we reviewed the PCI documentation, we made a very explicit statement saying that it's only for that control, because enabling our services for PCI, it's pretty complex, and we're not ready for that at this point in time. And then the other two things that we do is we do a review of our support cases and support trends just to see if there's any anomaly. Is there something going on that the way that Merck's leveraging AWS that is cause of concern? So we look at our support cases and support case trends. And also AWS puts out security bulletins. So we document those security bulletins, and if we have to take some actions against it, we document that as well. So all of these things account to what we call as our annual review.
More of the specifics of layer 2, which I call within an infrastructure, within the overall architecture, as that layer where we're configuring or controlling our infrastructure environment or infrastructure system. So again, this is the layer that Sujatha's team controls. This would be where the AWS Management Console is. And clearly, we have some key controls here that we need to satisfy. For instance, provisioning of resources from the Management Console. We have to be very clear as to what controls we have in place when people are provisioning those resources, when can they provision them, what procedures they have to follow to provision them, and so forth. Also, things like privileged user access at this layer. We need to ensure we have proper controls related to those types of things. So again, these are the 4 primary control objectives. I believe there might be a couple more in the white paper, but just to kind of give you a flavor. Okay. All right, layer 3. This is really the most important layer when it comes to defining your infrastructure system. So this is really where you do most of your infrastructure qualification work that we know from the past, using that term. But here, this is really where we're designing, building, and testing our infrastructure system that we are, for Merck's intended use or your intended use, this is where that golden image or standard image is created and controlled. So clearly, a very important layer. This is, so clearly from an infrastructure qualification point of view, we have a lot of controls. We also implemented a couple additional controls when it comes to data integrity. Right now, I would say 90 to 95% of our inspectional findings in the industry, not just at Merck, but in the industry, are around data integrity. So we want to make sure that we're designing these infrastructure systems at this layer, that we're putting in or we're specifying and designing the right audit trails, logs, or whatever we need in order to ensure the data integrity. And then, of course, backup and recovery. That's always a big inspectional topic that the inspectors want to know about. So we have controls for that as well. Okay, so once we go from layer 3 and build, say, our standard of the infrastructure at that level, then we have layer 4 and 5. And layer 4 is basically the infrastructure elements that we put into our environment based on the layer 3. So every time we put in something into our production environment, it's kind of like a copy of what we did in layer 3 for a certain type of infrastructure system. Clearly, we have to have the right controls because it's in our production environment, as well as layer 5, which is the business system, or the business layer that's consuming the infrastructure that we put out there at layer 4. So clearly we have a lot of controls there as well, especially around the system development lifecycle, service level agreements, and so forth. Okay. Lastly, in doing this reverse engineering and this analysis, there's a couple topics that are always important when it comes to inspections and the regulatory bodies. The first is backup and recovery. This is something that we know that the inspectional agencies are going to be asking about. So we ensured that we put in the right controls at different layers. And this particular topic is part of layer 3, 4, and 5 in different ways. So the white paper and strategy kind of talks about that and ensures that we have controls at those layers specifically for backup and recovery. The other thing is encryption. We found that encryption is a very important control as well. This control really helps enable data integrity, which is, again, a very key topic in the GxP world. Number one, it helps prevent unauthorized data access modification. And two, it can detect data integrity issues. So, for instance, if somebody tampers with your encrypted data, during the de-encryption process, you would know something's wrong, and you would understand that. So clearly, that's a good control. And then, in terms of preventing unauthorized access, if somebody steals your data or somebody takes your data and it's encrypted, unless they have the key, the data is still safe. And if you wanted to unencrypt it using brute force, it would probably take 100 years to do so with the current encryption technology. So clearly, laying out that rationale in our strategy, again, we feel provides those controls that those agencies are looking at. Okay, so that kind of concludes our discussion. Chris?
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, Sujatha. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. Yeah. Evaluations, and we'll take questions after over here, so thank you all.